On Monday evening, around 6:15, the doorbell rang, and to my surprise, it was my cousin Eric. Given that I usually don't get home before midnight, I assumed he must have forgotten my schedule. I let him in, handed him a beer, and we settled down to watch Monday Night Football while catching up. Eric seemed a bit let down that my wife, Diane, wasn't around. She had called earlier to let me know she'd join us later with some work colleagues for drinks. I was really looking forward to her coming home. Diane and I hadn't been intimate for over 3 weeks, thanks to her constant complaints about being tired or having headaches. Eric left around 8 o'clock, and I found myself dozing off in front of the TV, a rare sight for me. When I woke up, Diane's car was parked outside, but she hadn't come to wake me for bed, which struck me as strange. We eventually did have some intimate time, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was always finding excuses to turn me down. It made me doubt my value as her partner. After weeks of this pattern, Diane asked me if she felt too loose, which confused me. I told her she was perfect for me, even though I suspected she wasn't being honest. I was caught in a moral dilemma. Honesty about physical compatibility is crucial, but it has to be handled delicately. Despite my love for Diane, I had lingering doubts, even after she agreed to marry me, which left me unsure about our future. When I tried waking Diane for some affection, her groggy response was, "Oh, it's you." My disappointment at finding her asleep in bed quickly flared into anger. "Who did you think it was?" "You miserable cow," I shouted, my frustration boiling over. "What's going on?" "Who were you with?" I stormed out of bed, grabbed my shorts from the floor, and went downstairs. I snatched a beer and retreated to the patio to cool off and process what had just happened. It felt like she was initially interested, but once she realized it was me, she lost interest. Her tone was dismissive, almost like she was thinking, "Great, him again." As I looked up at the night sky, doubts crept in about whether her claims of spending time with friends were real. Then it hit me. How was I going to afford a detective to find out the truth? It seemed like she could read my mind but showed no remorse, as if thinking, "Oh well, he knows now." Restless, I decided to watch TV. I found a blank tape, put it in the VCR, and started watching last week's NCIS. What I saw was eye-opening. I paused the tape and went upstairs quietly, finding Diane already asleep. I went back downstairs, resumed the tape, and watched as my wife was in bed with Eric. The camera angles suggested it was hidden in the closet, recording their actions. The betrayal cut deep, and I was overwhelmed with questions about how often this had happened. Suddenly, a stranger's voice broke the silence. What did I do to deserve this? Diane's frantic attempts to call someone caught my attention. She dialed a number urgently, pleading for an answer. I grabbed the phone and confronted her, making her recoil in fear. "Why don't you get Eric to retrieve the tape?" I demanded, warning him to stay away from me in the future. I promised that if I ever saw him at a family event, it would be his worst day ever. I slammed the phone down and glared at Diane. "Thanks to you and my idiot cousin, I don't need a private investigator. You gave me all the proof," I spat. I retrieved the tape, kissed it, and played it on the TV. Diane trembled and asked, "What will you do? What do you think?" "I'm divorcing you," I snapped. "I don't want a divorce," she pleaded. I scoffed. "Why not?" "You clearly don't care about me." I told her to leave, hid the tape, and made coffee while making a to-do list for the morning. Even though our state didn't have a no-fault divorce law, infidelity could influence the court's property division. I was shocked by her betrayal, but at least I hadn't added her to the house deed. As I worked on the list, I heard Diane leave. I reflected on how quickly love turned to hate and focused on my next steps, appreciating the online resources available. When I went to my room, I noticed the blank tape I left on the TV was missing, and I smiled, hoping Diane had taken it without watching it. Back at my computer, I took steps to protect myself by transferring most of our joint account funds to my personal savings and canceling joint credit cards, leaving only my own intact. Satisfied with my efforts to safeguard myself, I slept well. The next morning, I went to the bank to open a safe deposit box in my name only and moved valuables from the one Diane had access to. At the office, I instructed my secretary to intercept any messages from Diane and inform her of our impending divorce. Each action I took affirmed my independence, preparing me for the challenges ahead. When I arrived at work, Nina told me that Greg urgently needed to see me. As I reached his office, his assistant Tina directed me straight to him. "You're late, and it's a bad time," Greg said as I walked in. "You need to catch the next flight to Atlanta. Harris's company is refusing to sign a new contract, and I need you to handle it." I expressed my hesitation, explaining that I needed to deal with Diane, who was a threat to my home while I was away. Greg reassured me and offered to handle the legal matters through his trusted lawyer, Evan Chandler, whom he spoke highly of. He set up a way for me to contact Chandler while I was en route to the airport. With Tina taking care of my flight reservations, I reluctantly accepted the assignment, acknowledging its importance despite my personal turmoil. I rushed home, packed quickly, and secured the house before heading to the airport. On the way, I reached out to Chandler, who gave me some advice and promised his support. After navigating airport security, I checked in at the Delta counter and waited in the boarding area for my flight to Atlanta. While I mulled over Chandler's advice, I decided to spin a story about Eric threatening Diane to justify a restraining order. I assured Chandler that if Eric made any moves, I'd handle him myself and added that Diane seemed eager to watch, layering the deceit to keep Diane at bay until my return. Despite knowing it was all a lie, I felt a sense of justice considering Diane's own deceptions with Eric and others. Chandler confirmed the restraining order was feasible but warned of a hearing in 10 days to finalize it. My trip to Atlanta was productive. I resolved the contract issue swiftly and earned Alan's praise. He informed me that a locksmith and his son-in-law had taken measures to secure my house. During my stay, I made courtesy visits to 2 other clients before catching Flight 720 back home. Upon checking my phone, I found several missed calls and voicemails from Diane. After deleting her messages, I listened to Chandler's urgent voicemail, which confirmed he had secured the protective order and planned to serve it to Diane at her workplace the following morning. I was grateful to Greg for the recommendation and thanked him. Returning home at midnight, I was greeted by a sheriff's deputy who asked for my ID. I showed him my driver's license and thanked him for keeping an eye on the house, assuming he was Greg's brother-in-law. He handed me a ring and keys, explaining that all the locks in the house used the same key. Apparently, Diane had tried to enter twice and got upset when she was turned away. Inside, I noticed the answering machine blinking, but I was too exhausted to deal with it. I turned off the phone and went to sleep. In the morning, I checked the answering machine and found all messages were from Diane, repeating the same desperate plea for me to call her. I thought, too late, honey. At work, Nina informed me of Diane's persistent calls but reassured me she hadn't managed to reach her. I thanked Nina and expressed my appreciation for her support. She joked, "You say that to all the girls," as I gave her a friendly kiss on the forehead. In Greg's office, I updated him on the situation and thanked him again for his help. He asked about my plans next, to which I replied, "Get on with life, maybe find someone who'll put up with me." Greg encouraged me, saying things would improve over time. Back at my office, I focused on work and called Chandler, who confirmed that the papers would be filed by 10 a.m. and that he would serve them to Diane before lunch. I agreed, and Nina invited me to lunch at Tricaxi's. During lunch, Nina handed me a piece of paper and said, "Here's today's cheer-up attempt." I glanced at it and saw a list of names. "What's this?" I asked. "A list of girls interested in you now that you're single," she replied. I noticed a few familiar names, including Sophie Bennett from accounting. "Isn't she engaged?" I asked. "She was, but she kicked him out after catching him cheating." Do you really think she's into me? I inquired. Nina assured me that Sophie had mentioned she'd snatch me up if I were single. I scanned the list again, noting 7 names. Besides Mary, 2 others caught my interest. So, you're saying they're all interested? I asked. I've heard them express interest in you, Nina confirmed. I grinned. I noticed your name isn't on here, I said. I considered it, but given the circumstances, I'd rather not, she explained. Why? You're married, and I'm just beginning a divorce due to my wife's cheating, she reasoned. You gamble? I thought you and Victor were solid, I remarked. We were, until I found out he was cheating with his secretary. Instead of divorce, I'm opting for kindness, she admitted. You're wrong. Even knowing you're married wouldn't stop me. You should have put your name on the list, I said. You'd be perfect for me right now I know you're joking. I'm far from perfect, she laughed. That's where you're mistaken. You have one characteristic they lack, I teased. And what's that? She asked. You're married, and they're not, I replied. You'll have to explain that, she said. Right now, I don't need an emotional connection. It'd be too easy to get involved with the 3 on your list that I'm interested in. You're already engaged and seem focused on retaliation with your husband. If we got involved, it'd be strictly physical, I explained. Are you serious? She asked. Absolutely, I affirmed. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't pursue a married woman, but if she's free, that's a different story. What about a long lunch then? She suggested. Not today, but I'm free tomorrow, I agreed. It's a date, I didn't think it was hypocritical at all. According to Chandler, once Diane received the divorce papers, we'd be legally separated. At 2:45, Diane called. Knowing she'd probably been served, I answered. What do you want? I asked bluntly. Why can't I get into the house? What's going on with the divorce? And why are my credit cards not working? What about the protection order? She demanded. I snapped back, I've had enough. Your cards are canceled because part of divorcing a cheating wife means cutting off her financial access. You can't get into the house because you're not living there anymore, and honestly, I don't want you there. You need to stop this, Dave. It's just a fling, it meant nothing. I only love you, Diane pleaded. I see it differently, I replied. You cheated on me, which makes you a betrayer in my eyes. That's why I filed for divorce, Diane insisted. We should talk about this face to face. Surprisingly, I agreed. Where and when? She asked. Not tonight, I said. I've barred you from the house, you can't keep me out, she protested. Actually, I can. The house is mine now, not yours. You'll get your belongings with a court official present to ensure everything's fair, I stated firmly. Let's just talk it out, Diane suggested. Not here, I insisted. You're being unreasonable. Where then? She demanded. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., at Angelina's restaurant. We'll have some privacy there, I proposed. I ended the call, wondering if Diane truly believed her excuses would convince me. Sadly, the answer seemed to be yes. Why wouldn't she think I was naive? I'd let her off the hook for years. That evening, I went to the Landing Strip Lounge after work, hoping to lift my spirits. It was open mic night, so I hoped for some laughs. I sat at the bar, and Megan greeted me. The usual, Dave? She asked. I usually get a PBR and some good company, I replied. Megan poured my beer and said, I've got a keeper for you. Then a woman took the stage for stand-up comedy. She told a joke about a surveyor who discovered that a farm, believed to be in Minnesota, was actually in Wisconsin. The farmer sighed with relief, saying it was the best news he'd had in a while. He'd just told his wife he couldn't endure another Minnesota winter. The comedian continued, the New York City Department of Education reports that only 26% of 3rd through 8th graders pass the English exam. But they're so bad at math, they don't even realize how bad it is. 2 more comedians followed her, and I left feeling significantly better than when I arrived. Maybe there's truth to the saying that laughter is the best medicine. The next day at work, as soon as I settled at my desk, Nina reminded me about our lunch date. Despite a hectic morning, we headed out at 11:30. On the way to the Marriott, I asked her if she really preferred eating before our plans. She chuckled and replied, "Being entertained on a full stomach slows me down a bit." We checked in under the names Mr. and Mrs. Eric Thompson, a nod to Diane's affection for donkeys. Once in the room, we quickly got into lovemaking. The rest of the day flew by, and soon it was time to meet Diane at Angelina's. I arrived early and secured a booth in the quietest corner, away from the dance floor. I ordered my usual and settled in to wait for her. When Diane arrived 5 minutes later, she looked stunning as ever. Normally, her presence would spark certain desires, but the knowledge of her betrayal suppressed that urge. As she sat down, she ordered her usual Cosmo, clearly irritated when I requested separate checks. Sipping my beer, I said, "All right, Diane, you called this meeting. What's on your mind?" Diane replied, "Honestly, Dave, you could have been more courteous given the circumstances. Diane, you're lucky I haven't ripped you apart." "Speak up or I'll walk out." With a sigh, she said, "You're blowing things out of proportion, Dave. We don't need to divorce. I love you, always have, always will. My affair with Eric means nothing to me. Yes, it happened, but it was just physical. Most of the time, I can't stand him. He's never posed a threat to you or our marriage. If he means nothing to you, why prioritize him over me?" I didn't. "Yes, you did. Reflect on the past 6 months. How often have you been there for me? Mostly reluctantly, doing favors. Think about the last 3 weeks. I've heard your excuses every night while you've been enjoying yourself elsewhere, and you call that love? It hasn't been that brief, it certainly has. For 3 weeks, you've been avoiding me. And when you finally say, 'I'll be lucky to have you home,' you just go straight to bed. When I tried to initiate something, you were all for it until you realized it was me. Remember that, Diane? Oh, it's you. I'm tired. Leave me alone. That's all, Diane." That, oh, you said it all. And then that tape was the last straw. Then why even tell Eric these things? Because Eric likes hearing it. He has this pathetic need to feel superior to you. I tell him these things to boost his ego. There's nothing wrong with you in bed, Dave. You've always satisfied me, then why seek pleasure with other men? It's not other men, Dave. It's only Eric, so, you don't consider it cheating if it's just Eric. That's not what I meant. Regardless of whether it's one man or many, enjoying another man's company while married is cheating, no matter how you spin it. Answer me this. Before seeing that tape, would you have said our marriage was good? Maybe it was okay, but definitely not great, I said. I dated Eric before we got married, and it didn't affect our relationship. Did you fool around with my idiotic cousin before we tied the knot? Yes, I did, Diane admitted. Then why on earth did you marry me? Because I love you, Dave. I'm not even that fond of Eric, so why are you spending time with him? Because he offers something you can't. Think of Eric as a temporary helper for me. You're out of your mind if you think you can convince me of that. If that's all you want to discuss, we're done here. I started to stand up, but Diane interrupted. You'll never convince Dave that infidelity is acceptable. You don't have any proof to back that up. Don't forget, I have the tape you and Eric made for me. Are you sure? I asked, my tone firm. Absolutely, I replied, turning away from her. As I reached the door, I couldn't help but smile. Clearly, she hadn't checked the tape she took from home. It was blank. Just as I was about to open my car door, I heard the click of her heels behind me. Turning around, I saw Diane hustling towards me, half walking and half running in her high heels. I was impressed by her speed in those shoes. She reached me, breathless, and said, "I need to get into the house, Dave. I need my clothes and things." I felt a twinge of insensitivity but justified it to myself. "Have your lawyer contact mine to arrange it," I replied as I slid into my car. I rolled down the window and said, "Goodbye, Diane," then drove off as she shouted, "Wait, Dave, just a minute." I could have let her follow me home and retrieve her things without any hassle. It wouldn't have been a problem for me. But at that moment, I thought, forget her. If she didn't already have a lawyer, it would take her a day or two to find one. Since it was Thursday, I figured the earliest she could secure one would be Monday, plus an extra day to organize her return to the house. By then, I'd have packed all her belongings into garbage bags, showing little care in the process. If I was lucky, she'd have to take everything to the dry cleaner or laundromat before using it again. Was I a bit bitter towards Diane? Maybe. Our relationship had been smooth, and I slept soundly that night. The next day, I enjoyed another long lunch with Nina. As a particularly busy period came to an end, Nina asked about my weekend plans. When I told her I had none, she suggested, "Would you like to spend the weekend with me?" "I'd love to, but how will you keep it from your husband? He's going fishing this weekend. He packed up this morning and will leave straight from work. I'm available from now until noon on Sunday, if you need me." Silly girl, let's see. Dinner and dancing tonight, then more fun at home. On Saturday morning, more playtime. Dinner and dancing again Saturday night, followed by more at home. Sunday morning, play until noon, then brunch. How does that sound? Sounds great, but let's skip the dancing and focus on playtime. That won't work. Your energy never seems to run out, and mine needs a break sometimes. All right then, your planet is back at work. I told Nina I'd pick her up at 7 and instructed her to pack for the weekend, as she wouldn't be coming back until Sunday. When I got home, I noticed Diane had been quick to find a lawyer. As I went to change in the bedroom, I saw that part of Diane's dressing room was empty. Most of her things were gone. I checked around and found a broken window in the family room facing the patio. Although I couldn't prove Diane was responsible, I found some satisfaction in seeing blood on the glass shards, indicating she might have hurt herself climbing in. I called a glass company listed in the yellow pages, set up an appointment for the next day, and decided to leave the mess until morning. With my decision made, I went upstairs, showered, and got dressed for my evening out with Nina. We enjoyed a nice dinner, danced, and had drinks. Although we went to bed at 11, we didn't fall asleep until 3, leaving me completely exhausted. After Nina had her fill of me, I set my alarm for 9, expecting the repairman between 10 and 12. However, Nina woke me up at 7:20 in a very pleasant way. While I waited for the repairman, I cleaned up the broken glass and finished just as he arrived at 10:10. By 10:40, the repairs were done, and by 11, Nina and I were enjoying a late breakfast at Tricaxi's. After breakfast, I asked Nina what she wanted to do next. "Just relax and cuddle. That's all I want," she said. And that's exactly what we did. Energized, by 5, we decided to order pizza and continue our lazy day. We opted out of intimacy on a full stomach and chose instead to lounge on the couch and watch TV for a while. Our TV time was cut short, though. Sunday morning arrived, bringing the realization that I'd have to return Nina to her husband. This led me to wonder how much time we had left together, which I brought up over pancakes at the Village Inn. "How much time do we have left?" I asked. "What do you mean?" Nina's response came quickly. "So, when do you plan to end things with me?" I looked puzzled. "Why do you think I'd leave you? From what you mentioned about flirting with your husband," Nina replied, her eyes narrowing slightly. I clarified, "I thought you were just casually flirting, not actually involved in anything serious," Nina sighed. "Maybe that's true, but it wasn't what I intended. Usually, the men I met became clingy, wanting me to leave Victor for them. But none of them could match Victor's lifestyle," she said. Trading a cozy home for a tiny apartment and worrying about bills every month doesn't sound appealing, I'm used. Plus, those guys were never better in bed than Victor. And they were messy, and I always wore my wedding rings, Nina added. I frowned. You sought attention knowing they knew you were married, true, but I wasn't looking for a replacement for Victor. I just wanted to get back at him. Being with them didn't mean I cared about them emotionally, she admitted. Be honest. If they started stalking me, knowing I was married, could I ever trust them in a real relationship? So, I'm just another fling? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Don't be ridiculous, Nina said. I've been working for you for over 5 years. You've never flirted with me. I practically gave you an open invitation. You chose not to pursue it, which was smart. I offered, and you didn't refuse. If this ends, it'll be because I choose to end it. It won't be anytime soon, she flashed a grin. Do we have time for one more before I have to take you home? We drove off, and as I retired that night, I felt elated. Monday morning, I reflected on my relationship with Nina. I realized things couldn't continue as they had over the weekend. I was suing Diane for infidelity, and if she hired a good lawyer, they'd likely look for anything to use against me. If I got caught with Nina, Diane might use it to her advantage. I wasn't willing to give up Nina for the divorce proceedings. I'd already dealt with enough during my marriage to an unfaithful wife. When I arrived at work, I called Nina into my office to discuss our plans. I have a couple of ideas, she began. But I'm not sure if they're feasible. Let's hear them, I said, eager to find a solution. First, you need to replace the uncomfortable chairs in your office with a couch, she suggested. That way, we can meet more comfortably, and it'll look like a normal office setup. I can arrange that, I agreed. What else? Well, you often stay late. I can stay late too, and after we install the new couch, I'll leave 10 or 15 minutes after you so anyone watching won't see me leave with you, she said. That should work, I nodded. Any other ideas? Another option is for me to leave for lunch. Before you head to the hotel, book a room and let me know the room number. When you arrive, take the elevator to the second floor where the conference rooms are, then use the stairs to reach the floor above. We need to be seen together. If we arrive and leave separately, it'll work, she explained. Perfect. Let's go with that for tomorrow, I instructed. I sent Nina off to schedule the conference and then ordered the couch myself, paying for it without waiting for approval. At 5, I called Nina into my office and told her to inform her husband she'd be working late on Thursday. The couch will be delivered around noon, I added. How did you manage everything so quickly? She asked. I took care of it myself, I replied. Seeing no one around, Nina leaned in and kissed me quickly. I was hoping we wouldn't have to wait until Thursday. Don't forget about tomorrow's conference with the Ajax guys, I reminded her. Oh, right, she said, snapping out of her daydream. Despite the mood I was in, my good spirits took a hit when I arrived home and saw Diane's car blocking the driveway. She had parked in the middle, preventing me from getting into the garage. I had to park in the street and maneuver around her car. As I got out of my car, Diane approached me. We need to talk, Dave. Things are getting out of hand, she said, her tone serious. I brushed past her, heading towards the front door. Diane followed me, but I was focused. I reached into her purse that she had left in her car, tipping its contents onto the seat. After quickly counting the cash and pocketing it, I tossed the purse back onto the seat. You still owe me $14 for the broken window, I said firmly. We have nothing more to discuss. Diane's voice quivered with desperation. Dave, I love you. I don't want a divorce. We can work through this. It doesn't have to end like this, she pleaded, her eyes wide with hope. No, Diane, I replied firmly, there's no way we can salvage this, especially after learning you betrayed me before we were even married. It's over between us. Her face fell. I had hoped you'd come to your senses, but deep down, I knew you wouldn't. If you're set on divorce, I'll fight you. I won't accept infidelity without a fight. I know the law is on my side, and I won't settle for a 70-30 property split, she warned. I'm sorry you won't take responsibility for what you did, but infidelity is a fact, I said. You'll have to prove it, Dave, and you can't, Diane countered, her tone sharp. It'll be your word against mine, and I'll deny everything vehemently. I'll claim you're trying to cheat me out of my fair share of our property. You might even face consequences for it. You seem to forget that I have visual evidence of your infidelity with my cousin, I shot back. No, Dave, I haven't forgotten, Diane said, her face turning pale. I grabbed that tape as I left and destroyed it. It's your word against mine, and without proof, you'll lose, I shook my head. You destroyed it? Eric will never forgive you. He needed that tape desperately. He might even lose interest in you because of it. Do you understand that I don't care about Eric? Yes, I wanted what he offered, but I don't need it. I need you, I don't owe you anything, I said coldly. You still owe me $14 for the broken window. I then turned and walked back into the house. Diane continued to knock on the door and ring the bell for a solid 10 minutes before finally leaving. As I watched her retreat down the driveway, I smirked. It was clear she had destroyed the tape without checking its contents. I hoped Diane would hire a lawyer and contest the divorce, racking up legal fees and debt, only to find out that the tape was still in my possession. I wanted her to realize that her efforts were futile. I slept soundly that night, content with the thought of her upcoming legal battle. Tuesday's conference call with the Ajax representatives went smoothly, lifting my spirits further. Wednesday was even better when Nina suggested a quick encounter on my desk after everyone had left. I gladly accepted. As I drove home, I decided to stop by the Landing Strip Lounge, my favorite restaurant. To my surprise, it was hosting an open mic night, making it difficult to find a seat. Eventually, I settled at the bar just as Chris Nolan handed the microphone to a mechanic from Triple T Sales and Service in Franktown. This mechanic was highly intelligent, holding degrees in both electrical and mechanical engineering. He shared a fascinating story about how he had built a robot designed to detect lies, inspired by a misleading radio commercial he'd heard. After his story, I finished my beer and headed home. The next day brought two pieces of good news. First, my lawyer informed me that Diane's attorney had contacted him to contest the divorce. Second, my new black leather couch was delivered. I chose leather for its durability, anticipating the inevitable stains. This proved wise when Nina and I made a few marks on it later that afternoon. The following weeks flew by with frequent encounters with Nina, mostly on the couch, though we used the conference room's bed on 3 occasions for greater comfort. Diane continued to call almost daily, begging for reconciliation and suggesting we forget the past and move forward together. Instead of changing my phone numbers to end these calls, I took a perverse pleasure in telling her she was wasting her time. Meanwhile, Chandler and Diane's lawyer were busy with legal matters. I was hopeful that Nina's lawyer charged by the hour, as I had arranged a flat fee with Chandler, regardless of the time the proceedings took. Chandler knew about the tape but had never mentioned it to Diane's lawyer. They had proposed that if I changed the grounds for divorce from infidelity to irreconcilable differences and agreed to an equal property split, Diane would drop her resistance. I instructed Chandler to offer a 65-35 split, knowing she would likely reject it. Chandler explained that he would need to inform the opposing party about the tape before presenting it to the judge. He advised me that failing to settle beforehand could anger the judge. I gave Chandler discretion to handle the situation as he saw fit. After all, that's what I was paying him for. It seemed Diane had someone tailing me, or at least I suspected so. A stranger seemed to appear wherever I went, which made me uneasy. It might have been paranoia, but it felt real. Another week passed, and Chandler called to say that Diane and her lawyer wanted to meet. I instructed him to arrange it and let me know the time. He later informed me that the meeting was set for Friday at 10 in the morning, that I arrived ahead of schedule at 9:30 and had a discussion with Evan. We agreed to bring the tape to the meeting, but I decided to have one last go at messing with Diane. As usual, she tried to deflect with her typical excuses, denying the cheating allegations and claiming I was being unreasonable. I cut her off, reminding her of the tape she and my cousin had made. She confidently responded that she didn't know what I was talking about, fully aware that there was no concrete proof to back my claim. "I'll make you a deal, Diane," I said. "If you sign the papers right now, I'll agree to a 60-40 split. But you've got 2 minutes to decide. If not, I'll leave it to the judge. I won't agree, Dave." "You have no proof," Diane countered stubbornly. "Oh, I've got a tape of you and Eric," I replied, watching her reaction closely. As expected, she flew into a rage, exclaiming, "Damn it, Dave, I already told you I destroyed the damn tape." So you admit to infidelity in destroying evidence," I observed, noting her wide-eyed realization. "No, that's not what I meant," she quickly backpedaled. "Forget it, Diane," I said. "I offered you leniency, but your usual stubbornness led you to refuse." "Let the courts decide," Diane's lawyer jumped in. "If you really have evidence, you better show it now," I signaled to Chandler, who moved to press play on the TV VCR at the end of the table. "This is your last chance, Diane. I'm offering a 60-40 split, but once he hits play, the offer is off the table and we'll go to court." "Screw you, Dave." "You've got nothing on me," Diane retorted. With that, Bert hit play, and I stood up, saying, "See you in court, Diane," before walking out of the room. Before I even got out of the building, my phone rang. It was Evan, saying, "They're interested in negotiating." "Forget it," I replied. I gave her a chance, but she refused. "It's full steam ahead." Diane's persistent phone calls only escalated after that. I disconnected the house phone, and Nina knew not to forward any calls from Diane to me, leaving only my cell phone as a point of contact. I kept the number deliberately to frustrate Diane, enjoying the constant stream of missed calls from her. As for my personal life, Nina was providing more than enough excitement. 3 days after the meeting, Nina came to me with a serious expression and said, "We've got a major problem." I panicked, fearing her husband had discovered our affair. "How serious is it?" I asked. "Pretty serious. Victor needs to fly back to Ohio to handle some issues with his parents' inheritance. He'll be gone for a week, so what's the issue? How do we manage a week together?" she asked. After thinking it over, I suggested, "Simple. You leave work half an hour before me, drive to my place, park a block away, make sure all the curtains are shut tight, and when I get home, we'll have our time together. In the mornings, I'll head out to work, potentially drawing any pursuers with me. After a short wait to ensure I'm clear, you'll go to work. We'll do this until the weekend, when we'll come up with a new plan." "What about the weekend?" she asked. "I'll keep up the routine, but on Friday evening, when you get home, we'll stay in all weekend. Do you think you can handle 2.5 days with me?" "What I'm unsure about, dear, is whether I can handle 2.5 days with you. We won't know until we try," I said. We went through with the plan, and I managed to get through the weekend. However, once it was over, I felt a bit down, especially as Nina went back home to her husband. I had grown used to her presence. She was good company and we got along well. But I knew that once my divorce was finalized, I would be looking for a replacement for Diane. I valued the idea of marriage and yearned for a meaningful relationship where I could fall asleep beside a loving partner who would be there in the morning. While I could see that potential with Nina, she never made any clear indications that she would leave Victor. It seemed she was content with him, despite his occasional mistreatment, and was willing to stay with him as long as she could. Reflecting on the list that had started our affair, I reviewed it in my mind. There were 3 men on that list, none of whom seemed suitable as a spouse. 2 of them smoked, which I couldn't stand due to my upbringing in a household with heavy smokers. Sophie from accounting, the only non-smoker among them, was attractive but seemed too young for me. Our age difference suggested we might not have enough in common. A brief visit to her office, where she was listening to rap music, a genre I disliked, only reinforced this belief. While the idea of a fling with Sophie might be tempting, I doubted it would lead to a lasting relationship. These thoughts occupied my mind during my Monday morning commute. Once I arrived at work, I was overwhelmed with tasks, too distracted to think about personal matters. In fact, I was so busy that I had to turn down Nina's invitation for lunch when she popped her head into my office. Just before the end of the workday, Burke Chandler called me. "Diane is keen to settle things," he said. "I understand your reluctance to negotiate, but offering her a 60-40 split to sign immediately might be a good idea. Infidelity often impacts asset distribution, but with 2 out of 7 divorce judges being women, they frequently lean toward a 50-50 split regardless of the reasons behind the divorce. We could end up with one of these judges. It might be wise to settle now." After thinking it over for about 30 seconds, I told him to propose a 65-35 TSS deal and see how she responds. While waiting, Nina came into my office, asking if she could use the couch since she had missed her extended lunch break. I agreed. The next morning at 10 o'clock, Chandler called to let me know that Diane had accepted the 65-35 offer. He mentioned she would come by on Wednesday at 5 to sign the papers and asked for a brief meeting with me. Although I didn't see much point in it other than another chance to confront her, I wanted to wrap things up quickly to avoid further disruptions for Nina. I told Evan I'd be available at 2 o'clock for the meeting. When we met in the conference room, I took a seat and waited for Diane to start. Sensing my silence, she took a deep breath and said, "I don't want this, Dave. I know you might doubt it, but I still love you. Maybe we can figure out a way to work things out and stay together." I responded firmly, "Absolutely not, Diane. Not after discovering the depth of your betrayal. If it had been a brief affair, I might consider reconciling. If you had a few regrettable encounters before our marriage and then stayed faithful, I might have been able to forgive that. But a long-standing affair before we even committed to each other? No chance. Diane, there's no fixing this. You shower affection on a man you barely like while neglecting the one you claim to love. It's pointless, Diane. It just is that all?" she asked. "Can't you at least give us a chance, Dave?" "I can't, Diane. I'll never trust you again, and I refuse to live like this." I stood up and headed for the door. Before leaving, I added, "You're an attractive woman, Diane, so I'm sure you won't stay single for long. If you find someone, I hope he treats you as poorly as you've treated me." With that, I left the room and went to the landing strip. I took a seat at the bar where Megan served me a PBR and asked, "Where have you been, handsome?" I replied, dealing with a divorce and not in the mood to socialize. "I just needed a beer or two to unwind, so, does this mean I might get a chance to charm you now?" she teased. "I thought you were happy with your boyfriend all these years." I was, until I realized he wasn't who I thought he was. Deciding I'd had enough, I signaled for the bill. When Megan brought my change, she smiled and said, "When your divorce is final, don't forget about me, okay? I'll keep that in mind." "Take care," I replied, leaving in high spirits. Megan's interest was a pleasant surprise. Once Diane signed the papers, everything was settled. Even though I was still waiting for the final decision, I felt a sense of freedom from the constant scrutiny. Nina and I could finally stop our secret meetings. At around 10, Nina came into my office and asked about lunch plans. "Yes, I'll leave around 11:20 and book a room," I told her. "Actually, that won't be necessary anymore. Diane signed the papers yesterday, so there's no need to worry about avoiding something that might not even happen." At 11:30, we headed to the Marriott. Once we got to room 403 and closed the door, we jumped onto the bed. As we were getting dressed, Nina asked, "What's next?" "What do you mean?" I asked. I mean, now that you're free, she clarified. I hadn't expected that, but I quickly thought of a response. As long as you want me, honey, I'll stick around. But eventually, I'll be looking for a wife. I enjoyed being married. What qualities would you want in a wife? She asked. She should be attractive, love me, be able to put up with me, and be a decent cook. I can cook, she offered. I paused, understanding her real intention. I said, if you meet those criteria, I'll definitely consider you. But there's a catch, I won't practice bigamy. She looked puzzled for a moment, then it clicked, and she smiled. Don't worry, love. Victor's days are numbered. A concern crossed my mind, evident in my changed expression. Nina noticed and asked, what's wrong? What are you thinking about? We've reached a point where we don't need to hide from Diane anymore. But now, we need to keep things from Victor while you deal with your divorce. I might be wrong, but I doubt it's necessary. I'll give him a choice, infidelity or irreconcilable differences. I have plenty of evidence of his cheating. If I threaten to expose him, he'll probably choose irreconcilable differences to protect his career. Victor is aiming for a vice presidential role, but the CEO and several board members are devout Christians. His chances might drop if his affairs become public. Although it might be inconvenient for me to stay in a motel for a week or two, we can manage that. Nina's plan went into action as expected. Following my advice, she set up a meeting with Chandler for Friday and asked Evan to prepare 2 sets of documents, one for infidelity and one for irreconcilable differences. Just before the bank closed on Saturday at 11:45, she withdrew half of the checking account, all her savings, and 4 of the 6 CDs from the safe deposit box. When she got home, she gathered up all of Victor's belongings that he had left behind in his quest for gold, packed them into her car, and checked into a motel. By 3 in the afternoon, she was back, cooked dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and while eating with Victor, she disclosed that she knew about his affairs, having evidence from private investigator reports on 3 different women. She declared that she had reached her limit and planned to divorce him. She explained her financial moves, saying she would give up her share of the house, which was worth more than her bank loan. Handing him the divorce papers, she laid out his choices and set a deadline for his decision, 10 o'clock Monday morning. With a smile, she left him to deal with the dirty dishes. As expected, Victor called her on her cell, choosing the option of irreconcilable differences. By Wednesday, they met at Evan's office, where Victor signed the divorce papers. Nina decided to stay at the motel over the weekend to let things cool down. Later, she moved in with me, and we planned to live together until our divorces were finalized and then marry. This created a problem. Nina was great at her job and wanted to keep it, but our company didn't allow relatives to work together. We could both stay, but one of us would need to transfer. Unfortunately, the nearest facility was 90 miles away, which wasn't practical. So, we decided to keep our marriage a secret. Nina kept her maiden name and continued with her health insurance until, if ever, we were discovered. If that happened, Nina would resign and find another job if she wanted. Although she didn't really need to work with my substantial income. She checked out of the motel on Sunday and was living with me by 3 p.m. The next 2 months passed quickly, and I began to relax and let my guard down, a big mistake. Diane called once or twice a week, and I usually answered just to dismiss her, which gave me a bit of satisfaction. I should have known she wouldn't give up easily. One Wednesday evening, Nina and I were at the landing strip, enjoying a few drinks. We went there occasionally, not necessarily on Wednesdays, but it had always been my favorite spot. That night, we were supporting one of the accounting girls who was trying her hand at performing. We clapped for Emily, but both Nina and I agreed she was better suited for her job than the stage. Emily's routine started with a skit where a man reading a newspaper gets hit on the head with a frying pan by his wife. "Why do you do that?" he asks. "Because I found a paper in your pocket with Anna's name on it," she replies. He explains that Anna is the name of a horse he bet on at the races. Apologizing, she goes back to her chores. Days later, as the man is watching TV, his wife hits him again, this time with a bigger pan, causing him to lose consciousness. When he wakes up, he asks why. "Your horse was calling," she quips. After some laughs, the storyteller continued. An elderly couple, who despised each other, stayed married for years. Their arguments would go on late into the night, with the old man threatening to haunt his wife after he died, which made the neighbors uneasy and led them to believe he practiced black magic. When he passed away from a heart attack at 85, his funeral had a closed casket. At the burial, the neighbors warned his widow about his possible return. She laughed it off, saying she had buried him upside down, so he wouldn't ask for directions when he came back. "You keep your damn hands off my man, you damn strumpet," Diane's voice sliced through the room, dripping with malice. I turned around to see her pouring a drink over Nina's head. Before I could do anything, Nina struck back, throwing her own drink into Diane's face. Diane stumbled and fell to the floor, and I quickly grabbed Nina and pulled her away. As I started wiping us down with some rags from my trunk, Diane staggered out the door, unsteady from a blow to her nose. And who was there to help her? None other than my irritating cousin Eric. I dropped the rags, shouted, "You rotten son of a cow," and charged at him. He let go of Diane, who collapsed, and then he ran. I chased him for 3 blocks before giving up and heading back to the strip parking lot. When I returned, I found Nina pinning Diane against the car's fender, shouting, "Get it into your stupid head, you stupid cow. I didn't steal it from you. You threw it away," and I was lucky enough to catch it as I approached. Nina backed away and said, "Let's get out of here. Get in the car. I need to go inside and sort things out with Mike." I found Mike inside, who assured me there was no damage. He even joked, "Next time, do it during intermission so the customers have something to look at when no one's on the mic." Outside, I saw Diane waiting for me at the entrance, but Nina was already in the car. Diane came up to me, pleading, "Please, Dave, call off the divorce. I'm dying, baby. I need you. I love you, and I know we can work this out." I shook my head in disbelief and said, "You must be the stupidest person on the planet, Diane. You're declaring your love for me while your current date is the very reason for our divorce. And to top it off, you're not even trying to be discreet about it. You need to let it go, Diane. The only feelings I have for you now are hate and disgust. Leave me alone." I walked around her, got into my car, and drove off. Both divorces were finalized, and I proposed to Nina. She surprised me by saying, "Ask me again in a year, baby. Let's see if we're really right for each other." After living together for a while, I waited a year, proposed again, and this time she said yes. We chose a simple civil ceremony at the Justice of the Peace, avoiding another big wedding. Diane ended up marrying Eric, but their marriage was short-lived. It turned out Eric had been cheating on her with several women, one of whom gave him a disease that he passed on to Diane. While cheating on me seemed acceptable to her, she couldn't handle being cheated on herself. 6 years after my marriage to Nina, Eric made the mistake of attending a wedding where I was also present. I stayed true to my old promise to him. It might be a while before I get another invitation to a family celebration.